Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. Before I went on the air, I was called by the original co-host of this show, my son, Phoenix. He wants to say hi. You want to say hi to everybody? Want to uncover your mouth and say hi? Okay, say hi. Okay. I'll call you when the show's over, okay? All right, love you. Press red. That was a unexpected phone call. Usually he's pretty good about knowing what time the show starts. He knows it's every Tuesday. Didn't even care. But thank you all for joining us this evening. Before we start, if you are new to the channel, please hit subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Thursday will be our bi-monthly news show with the guys from Left Reckoning, Revolutionary Reckoning, where we will talk about more evergreen topics. I'm sure someone will want to talk about election night. Oh, it is election night. And many shows are doing coverage tonight, mostly of federal races, probably some local ones that are more important in major metropolitan areas are more important. We didn't want to do a show like that tonight. We are not anti-electoral politics in the slightest here at TIR. We just chose not to do it. Done it in the past here. I just wanted to do something a little different tonight. So if you enjoy what you get here on TIR and have the means, become a patron. You'll get access to the exclusive champagne room. You can join us for our movie nights for as low as $3 a month or $30 a year. It can all be yours. Pascal and MT have the night off tonight, so it's just be you and me and my good friend and special guest tonight, Pascual Romero. And we're going to be talking a little bit of music and a little bit of capitalism. Oh, yeah. Recently, I came across an interesting article about what kind of artists are on the massive music streaming platform Spotify. I wasn't that surprised to read that the music streaming site is storing mostly smaller independent artists that lack major label support and have fewer than 1 million plays. Okay, is this a problem? And if so, why? What I found mildly shocking was the language that was used by industry higher-ups about housing so much independent music. Here's a quote from the article from Universal Music Group's Vice President of Digital Strategy, Michael Nash. The streaming platforms right now are flooded by a tidal wave of content as millions of creators are getting access. But these are essentially content uploaders. They're not artists in the sense that we traditionally think of artists. Nearly 80% of this multi-million creator uploading pool has a monthly audience of less than 15 listeners. In fact, 90% of these creators have fewer than 400 monthly listeners. That's 400 monthly listeners out of an audience of over 400 million on just Spotify alone. So just to put a data point behind that, that means 90% of these uploaders are engaging less than 1 millionth of the platform. These are hobbyists that are playing to an essentially empty house. Nash put it bluntly that a lot of the material uploaded is just noise and not by anyone that actually intends to be an artist. What is interesting, it was an interesting kind of way of looking at it, because then it brings up the idea of what constitutes an artist and who actually has the right to be on streaming services. And that's a really big conversation that sort of threatens the entire idea of the internet being a place where one can express their art without having to overcome some threshold. For those that are not musicians and wonder how easy or difficult it is to get music on streaming platforms, to get on any platform outside of something like Bandcamp, you need to go through a distributor, and they will collect royalties for you. And we can get into that a bit later. But the point I'm trying to make here is that these hobbyists are still paying not a lot of money, but some money to have their music featured on these streaming platforms. Sites like Pandora have an approval process and take a fewer amount of submitted music. But what happens to the artists that get their music on Spotify? Well, it's still a bit of a pay-to-play game, and the major labels are still wielding power. Even in the imagined Wild West freedom of the internet, from a review of the book Spotify Teardown, drawing on an experiment that used bot listeners to track streams, the authors visually represent how its algorithm produced music loops that displayed a repeated pattern with only slight variations according to which artist or radio station was based on. Not only did these loops look more or less the same independent of bot characteristics, but user feedback, or thumbs up, thumbs down, or skip, did not produce significant differences in the results. Their experiment confirms that Spotify has exaggerated its computational claims on its radio function, while also corroborating user complaints about Spotify's radio repetitiveness and recommendation inaccuracy. More provocatively, Spotify Teardown questions the normative claim that the radio algorithm should produce apt recommendations. Recommendation inaccuracy may drive users away from its free service and toward a paid subscription. It may also encourage users to stream Spotify's featured playlists instead of its radio function. And finally, it might be a covert way to promote more established and financially well-supported major label artists at the expense of independent and emerging musicians or neglected genres, with economic ramifications. Independent of its accuracy, personalization is critical to Spotify's marketing and business model. Spotify Teardown explains that the trope of personalization encourages users to develop a sense of intimacy with Spotify. For example, commercial playlists are marketed as mixtapes, adding a nostalgic and effective value to what are actually closer to compilation albums, wherein business-related aspects are more important than the creative process. In addition, the assumption that more input in Spotify's algorithm will produce increasingly accurate future recommendations compels users to do so. This means more revenue for Spotify because data produced from usage is used to lure advertisers. While personalization remains significant for Spotify, it has since de-emphasized its radio functionality in favor of in-house playlists and new computational recommendation formats based on taste profiles, song identification, and digital fingerprints. Unquote. Well, with all this said, let's bring in our guest tonight. He's one of my very good friends. He's been in and affiliated with countless bands in this moment: Fear Factory, Pathology, just to name a few. He's in an amazing death metal band with his lovely wife. Please welcome, coming all the way live from a secret bunker somewhere in the Southwest, Pascual Romero.
Hey.
What's up, dude?
Oh, not much. Just surviving, doing my thing.
Dad shit.
Lots of dad shit.
We both got thrown off with dad shit.
Yep.
Pasquale had pre-show dad shit, and I got, right as I was about to start the show, my lovely son, who sadly lives 600 miles north of me, wanted to call, and I promised him I would take every call. So, sorry guys, nothing stops I can't put the boy on hold. So,
Nah.
So Spotify and independent artists. I did write out a question for you. Pasquale, there is so much talk about streaming platforms ripping off artists and the death of terrestrial radio. It feels to me like radio is moving into more of a talk format, and the idea of your own personally curated station has a lot more allure than an ad-filled radio that is playing much less new music anyway. In your opinion, is Spotify bad for independent artists?
No, I don't think it is inherently bad for indie music. In fact, those of us who had the pleasure of trying to do music for a living as far back as the 90s, remember how bad radio was for indie music,
Oh God,
because it
yes.
was extraordinarily difficult to get music on the radio. Um, maybe local college stations, but it was you would not hear yourself on mainstream stations as a local. Um, but Spotify itself, it's just hard for me to blame them, but I kind of take the same view of them that I do of kind of how social media at large is, where it's like, it's they're all bastards. Like there's you we can split hairs over who the good ones are versus the bad ones, but I mean there's just bad and worse really.
Mhm.
But as far as how it's affected indie, no, I actually think that one of the silver linings is that there's better access to music, um, because of Spotify, and platforms like it, which, again, it's like, do I agree with the way they do things? Hell no. But what can I say? It's like, how else, is the general public going to find stuff?
And that's like my big beef. It's like as an independent, well, I don't like to say independent artist anymore because I don't feel like I'm doing all the things that I did when I was an artist. When I met you, I'm not doing all the touring. I think part of being an artist is getting your music out there. And if you think that the only way you're going to get your music out there is via streaming platform, I think you're kind of sadly mistaken. Originally, the death of music was supposed to be recorded music.
Right.
People really understand that, sheet music was the way to go, some time ago. People wrote songs and you sold it became sheet music so people could play it, and live is where you had to get your music enjoyment. And I didn't write this question out, but I think it's constantly part of a conversation that you and I probably are constantly having. We could throw Conan Neutron in the mix. I'm having this with him as well, and whoever else is listening or watching the show that's an artist, which is how much do you really rely on a streaming platform, and how much do even major label artists rely on a streaming platform? Because ultimately the radio is getting paid from your song on the radio is still a relatively newer phenomenon. The radio playing music is a newish, you're in your grandparents' time. There was a moment where the radio didn't play music. At one point in time, the radio boycotted the publishing platforms because of not wanting to pay out royalties.
Yep.
So I've always felt like, as a smaller artist that doesn't have major label capital or even big sponsorship dollars, another thing a lot of people don't know is Patreon. And I don't know if you remember this, Patreon started as a music site because the guy that started Patreon was in a band.
Yep.
That is a kind of a famous failure of a band. They had a song on a commercial. The song blew up in the sense of they had a lot of popularity because it was a national ad for, I think, a cell phone. They went on a huge tour where they bought a van with their advance money and all this new equipment to play to nobody, because a commercial does not equal quote unquote commercial success, right?
Yeah.
And and they fizzled out. But that guy started Patreon, which I remember getting emails and ads about Patreon, like, this is a great way for artists. You're going to constantly make money because people can pay a monthly fee. And I never saw the value as a consumer to pay a band $5 a month, because how much content can a band create? And then if you're an unknown band, i.e. myself, who really gives a damn about the behind the scenes making the album stories,
Right.
So,
right. I mean, yeah, you don't like to. It's. I understand the thought behind it, but it's like you can't. You don't subscribe to an artist just being an artist. You historically, and again, I've said this a bunch of times. I know I've said this on your show. You know, where we are in music is in this tiny little blip in the history of music that from the moment recorded music began to now is like the tiniest little sliver that could have not even existed given, you know, just a handful of variables. And so the fact that there is an industry at all is already kind of a mind-blowing thing, you know, maybe not for the better, but so it's kind of, I don't know, it's I don't like to call it entitled because that's a weird thing to say about an artist that's struggling. But you kind of have to look at art as an artist as something that is not intrinsically a commodity. Like you have to force it into being a commodity, and people have to decide that it's a commodity. You know, this isn't like something you put in a box and put on a shelf. And advertise in the same way you would like a box of macaroni, you know, and so because it's art, it's already, you know, like what is it worth, you know, and who decides that, and then to put it on a platform where you ask for repeated money and repeated investment, you know, it's like, well, I don't, you know, this isn't, you know, me setting the resupply button on some website that like sends me my toilet paper, you know. It's like, this is an artist creating something, and I mean, what are you giving me every month for my money? And again, it's like, yeah, it's capitalistic and transactional, but you're the one stepping into that arena when you do that.
Yes.
So you know, what do I think it's wrong? Not inherently, but I think that it's sometimes there's some hubris involved in thinking that, you know, what you're doing has a value that, you know, you're trying to set a value that other people haven't necessarily agreed to yet.
Well, is music a commodity like art? Because we don't trade it like we trade art, right? Like recently some billionaire, was it Paul Allen, just recently sold his art collection. I saw that in the news when I went up to the States the other day. So I forget how many ridiculous millions of gajillions of dollars of art that he sold.
Yeah.
We don't sell music in the same way. No one is selling the first print White Album from the Beatles. No one, maybe some reels might sell for some money, but they don't even last forever, unlike, you know, paintings. They will fall apart. I was reading an article about mixing the Justice for All album by Metallica, and the engineer that worked on it felt that he couldn't remix it because he thought that the tapes would be dust.
Yeah.
but why do we still look at music as some sort of commodity?
I think we were given a really poor, not necessarily understanding, but we accepted a very poor definition of like what music the product was. And we were like, you know, in the 50s, and I've said this before on the show, just, you know, it was all like this copy paste, like A&R guy just gluing boy bands together. Like 50s was a terrible decade for music. I'll die on that fucking hill. Because the industry was just like, here's a song this guy wrote, let's slap it on a, you know, here's 4 white kids, let's throw them out there and sell it. And then
very Fordist. Yes, very, very, very Fordist. And Motown that was a black faced on the same Fordist model. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I mean, the A&R era was really awful and actually set the tone for the music industry that started the ball downhill that led to where we are, and why all of a sudden we're like, what the fuck? But it's like, dude, we weren't supposed to be here. We weren't even, this isn't how art is. This is just that people with a bunch of money figured out that they could just slap music into the ears of kids through radio and TV and everything, and at the record stores, and then those kids would consume it, and what they were buying was plastic and paper, you know, from the labels. The music existed outside of that, yes, but you know, the problem is that at the end of the day, like, it just gets consumed and forgotten about, and you know, gets lost to time, and then a handful of, you know, the biggest bands survive that. But the reality is that music was never really the product. It was the image. It was the physical, you know, owning of the item that had the music on it. It was, you know, and even now it's like, it's the merch, it's the image of the band, and it never, you know, but at the same time we were still telling ourselves, well, the songs are the product. But it's like, no, they're the advertising for the product, and the product is everything that you're spending money on around that song. And the problem is that, you know, we decided when digital hit, and this is a huge failure by the industry. The industry just said, you know, they're like, what the fuck, people are just taking the music for free, and they have a way to play it, and they don't need to own a CD, and they don't need to buy the thing. And the industry, instead of figuring out how to work their model into that, just fought it until they lost. And when they lost, that became the, you know, that became the devaluing of the music. There was just, officially, music was worthless at that point. And so now we're kind of on the back end of that, where, you know, the people with money have in this, and it's not even the music industry that really developed this, like Spotify and stuff. None of that was sprung from the music industry. That was outside capitalists seeing, well, if we just sweep all these crumbs together, it makes a loaf of bread, right? So it's like, so they did, and that's, you know, that's where we are now. And the thing is that they're not selling us the bread. They're just putting the bread on a display shelf, and then, you know, they're selling the concept to people who are willing to give them a bunch of money.
That's actually quite frightening, the way you put that. There is a Spotify movie apparently on Netflix. I have not seen it. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I've seen it. I watched the trailer for it. It looks somewhat interesting, but it also looks like another version of what was the Facebook
Fire
movie?
Fest. Which one?
What was the Facebook movie?
Oh, this Social Network or whatever.
Social Network, where you know, it feels like almost a rags to riches or almost a Ray Kroc type story of some poor rich guy.
Yeah.
That got his thing off the ground. I did think it was interesting in that article about Spotify, where they're talking mostly about how these guys are playing to an empty room, and Spotify sends me an email, and I haven't put music on Spotify in 3-4 years, and they send me an email every month to let me know that no one's listening. I need to try harder.
Oh yeah. I don't even know who gets that email on my behalf. I don't get it though, but I'm sure some of my stuff is getting those emails.
Well, there's sites like Bandcamp, which for those people that don't know, when you get your music on the Pandora, Spotify, any of these sites, Blast FM, I remember was the first place I was on years ago. Yeah. You have to go through a distributor who collects copyrights. So anytime your music is played, even if it's your own show, it gets taken down by sites like YouTube.
Yeah.
Which that's the, you know, YouTube's big thing is taking down copywritten material.
Yep.
And I've had to argue too many times about my own music on this show. So that's why we don't play copyrighted music. And sometimes I even have to argue about my own compositions, where I literally played all the instruments, and they go, nope, it's showing up in our algorithm that it's somebody else's. So we're going to take this show down.
Yeah. It's wild. I mean, yeah, that stuff's ridiculous. I've had it happen a couple times, and yeah, with my own stuff, and you know, and that gets even stickier for me sometimes, because not everything I have is self-published. So I still retain all my rights, but it's, you know, published through a label. And so it's like I have to have the label go to bat on my behalf, even though they don't retain the rights to the music at all. They just were the ones who published it. And so it's a mess, man. I mean, the digital age is fantastic for a lot of reasons. I think accessibility and the ability to just put music out is great, but you know, the machine that surrounds it all just basically is just constantly crushing us.
Well, what happens now? You made a really interesting point when you talked about in the 50s, young people, and that was the whole thing about early quote unquote rock and roll, which let's not even call it rock and roll, early pop music.
Sure.
Because rock and roll is still race music. Let's go back to when rock and roll was race music. So just to give people an idea of how segregated and class-based this was in the early days of recorded music. You had race music, which is now rhythm and blues, or early rock and roll. You have Latin music, which was a no-no. And you have poor white people music, which was hillbilly music, they called it, which you now call country music, country and western. And those were three musics that weren't allowed to even get published.
Yeah.
So even though terrestrial radio is playing music in the 40s, they're like, we're only going to play music from these ASCAP artists. And to deal with this new kind of almost a cottage industry that gets formed with all these other people that are creating music, where there's still an audience for this. For rhythm and blues definitely had an audience. Country music definitely had an audience. And, you know, of course, Latin music has an audience in America. But only one place would publish them, and then still there was certain beef with radio stations. We don't want to deal with you. But then they got into beef with ASCAP. They're like, fine, we'll play this stuff, but it still kept the music extremely segregated. Do you want to, you know, kind of expand upon that? Because I know you know a lot of the history as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can really, for me, I mean, the music industry never really got fully out of that, and it just kind of changed flavors over time, you know. And but I mean, it stopped being so explicitly, I hate to not say racist, because it is, but it isn't. It was they realized, like, okay, I mean, money still spoke a little louder than any convictions over segregating the music, but at the end of the day, it was still like they were looking for specific things, and again, like how the 50s were, where they're just gluing songs onto, you know, groups of kids that can maybe play music. I mean, most of them weren't even that great. And then you know, by the like singer-songwriter era, which also, like, not, you know, certainly talent was a little better on better display at the time, but it still was, you know, heavily biased, and only certain people were being lifted up by the system. And you know, and you had your Motown, which was like a black version of the same A&R, you know, gluing songs to kids problem, and arguably better music. I mean, I'll give it that, but it never stopped being that way, though. It's just that they realized that some kids were willing to do the work for them. And so it was like, you know, instead of an A&R finding, you know, 4 kids that looked the part and could play instruments, and maybe a couple that could sing, they realized, like, as the 60s kind of came around, that there were kids that would like do all that work themselves, and then they could just take the music from them and just, you know, if they had the image, good, then we'll just make the Beatles, you know. But if they don't, like, we'll just, you know, do the
Monkeys.
Yeah, do the Monkeys. Perfect example, you know. So it's like, and yeah, and I mean, so that history, like, never really stopped. It just morphed a little, and it just looked a little different as you got to like the 80s, when, you know, especially when the industry was, I mean, Motown certainly changed the way things happened, because they were like, well, okay, white people will buy black music by black people instead of black music delivered by white people. And then, so then they were like, disco era comes around, like that momentum keeps going a little bit, and then the 80s, all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, like black music is just as marketable as white music, but we have to still market it to the white people, because it's like that's where we want it to be. And so it just stayed that way. So like the thing again, it just, when I look back, like when people complain about the current state, it's like, yes, it's fucked. It's fucked, but it's always been fucked. It's always been wrong. Was it possible to make a better living in the past? I guess. I mean, I started when you could still sell records, and it was easier for sure, but at the same time, it's like it depends on what your goals are. Like do I have more control over what I do now? Yeah, I have a lot more control over what I do. I don't have to please anyone with what I write. I don't have to I don't need approval for what I do. And so I don't know. I know it's kind of a tangent off of where you started me, but
that's fine.
I think it's always been bad, and we need to not forget that, because it's that stupid coloring of nostalgia that we get, where we just are like, well, remember back when Motley Crue got like $3 million to make a record? It's like, yeah, but like that was like one in a billion bands that could do something like that. Like,
thank you.
What were the working artists doing back then? They were doing nothing because no one heard them, and they played bars until they gave up. And like, that's why it's different now. It's like, at least I mean, I know local bands that have been around since the 90s that are still local bands, but they at least get to put out their records, so I don't know.
That's kind of, to me, at 45, I've found that certain inner peace with the fact that I can put out what I want to put out when I want to put it out, but I'm not going to be famous. And I think most people that put out music for public consumption, if you're really trying, you're touring, you're trying to get press and all that good stuff, you want to probably be somewhat famous. You may not admit that out loud. You may say that you don't want all the accolades, but it's like, then why do you do it?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to be famous, like, you're going to be, writing, you're going to be composing soundtracks or something, or doing, straight to media music, like video game soundtracks or something. But I mean, getting up on stage and putting that kind of effort in, like, you're trying to get some kind of recognition. I mean, I'm not too humble to admit that.
I can get it now on a much smaller level, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how you feel. There's definitely a lot I miss playing live. I found myself even missing driving. We did a live show recently for me and Ben Burgess and some other shows. Did a live show in LA, and it was a lot of fun. And driving there felt like a tour drive, even though I was in my Hyundai with just a couple people in it. But it had the same feeling. But walking on stage to a golf clap is a lot different than when the downbeat comes on and all dark and you start screaming and going nuts with your friends. I get it, like, I just think people don't want to admit, like, dude, I totally dig it. I want to be a little more famous.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had the kind of, my career was always like, do people recognize me walking down the street? No. Do people recognize me outside the venue when I'm playing somewhere? Sometimes, yeah. And like, that was where I loved. That was the space I liked, and again, it's, I mean, it's a little self-absorbed, but everyone likes that feeling, where someone appreciates what you do and they like want to, take a picture with you or ask for an autograph or something. And, so like, it's silly to think that that's not part of what drives you to do that, because again, like, I think the most, really the most like self-absorbed perspective on this would be like, no, I don't do it for the recognition. I only do it because the music needs to live in, the minds of, like that shit. That's the most jerk off shit, dude. Like fucking just go up and like, I hope I impress like 5 people in this room tonight. Like that's my thing. Like I don't like fucking my music has never been, high art. It's been stuff that I just did from the heart, and like I hope people like it and vibe on it and stuff. But it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's silly to think that there's like you don't want recognition for it, because if you don't, then you wouldn't. You literally, why the fuck did you walk out on that stage?
Oh yeah, dude. It's I can't stand people. So I'm getting teased from one of the people that is off tonight. One of the show producers is off tonight. M. Tucson says, I take one day off and you guys let Jason masquerade around like he's Maxwell. What's that Soulquarian hat about? Oh, M. Tucson, it's a little chilly here in my concrete home. And yes, and Jordan Dubin, who was in the car, she is the live show producer, was in the car with me as I was playing Zayo at very loud levels and driving maybe a little too fast on the freeway. So she also knows what tour driving is all about now. But I do want to ask you about this. And this is going to sound like an old guy ranting, and I don't care.
All right.
I am an old guy. I'm going to rant. There was still, even though we bought this plastic and paper that the industry gave us as the representation of music, we actually had ownership, if you will, of these songs. And we made trips sometimes to record stores. I've mentioned this on the show before. We asked the record store person about certain genres of stuff, and they could point us in the right direction of what was cool, or maybe your record store had the staff picks. We don't have that anymore. Music is way more disposable, I think, in this era than it was in the era of people actually physically owning CDs, records, and cassettes. Do you feel that same way, or do you feel that disposability hasn't really changed?
No, I think I think there's a distinct difference, and a lot of it boils down to like, yeah, there's the nostalgia. Like, I can remember the specific experience of certain albums I've bought. Like, I have very specific core memories about purchasing certain albums in my lifetime. Like, for instance, October of 1989 in San Francisco, I went to Aquarius Records with my dad. He took me in there, and I found Faith No More on a local band shelf. I bought the album Introduce Yourself, and that was my introduction to that band, who became a personal favorite, lifelong personal favorite band. And that, like, there is not an analog to that in the digital era. Like, I have discovered some bands I love on digital. I've discovered lots of great bands on platforms, and and that's good too. Like, bands I probably would have never heard of if I hadn't been on a digital platform. But I will never have the memory of, like, walking into a record store, finding something that I only bought, mind you, based on just the recommendation that it was a rock band that was a local band, and I was in San Francisco, and I was like, I'm not, I want to get a band that nobody that I know would have heard. And like, that's what I had, and this was on tape too. And so that was like, that sort of thing is just very, like, formative, and I don't think there's any way to get that with the modern day. Like, you had to put effort into finding music, you had to put effort into buying it. You had to have money for it when we were kids. Like, that was like a big deal, for me. I mean, buying a record was never a cheap proposition. I mean, it was
No.
like I had to have some money to spend, and I would like earmark my own money specifically for one album in 2 months sometimes. Like it could be really hard to do. And as a teenager, I spent basically all the money I made at jobs on music stuff. On if it wasn't records, it was music gear and stuff. But I mean that like, and nowadays it's like, yeah, I float past songs like a million a day, it feels like sometimes, and I don't even I'm like, oh, that's cool, and I don't remember the song 5 minutes later.
I feel that so I didn't do, and I don't know anyone listening to the show. Anyone listening to the show right now, and anyone's going to listen to it later, please leave a comment and let me know if you ever did this. I would love to know if you did this and what your experience was like. Did you ever do the penny a month Columbia House? Or a penny for 12 tapes or whatever it was?
Yep. Yeah, you had to like tape the penny to the card. And like,
I had to actually put an actual penny.
It made you mail them a penny. I did that. I'm sure somewhere in the annals of history there's like a string of collection notices for 14-year-old Pascual Romero. Like,
it took him years to get his credit right, people.
Yeah. Hey man, like you let a teenager do this, so it's on you, man.
I didn't know that those were different cassettes than the actual cassettes.
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't have liner notes in them, and
yep.
Which liner notes for me is how I discovered bands.
Yeah.
The liner notes for those early Metallica and Megadeth records were like a who's who for me. Like, okay, they said this band, and I got to go check out this band, and okay, they said Las Rock, so I got to go meet. I ended up getting to know some of these people in real life, living at that studio, which was pretty cool. Because my first instinct was like, you were the liner notes to kill them. Holy moly. But I want to know if you guys had experience doing that, and what was your experience for what they suggested you should listen to. Because I remember when I did it, they sent me, I did it as an adult. I was 21. I got married young, and I remember they sent me Diabolus and Musica, that whatever Slayer record. Yeah. And then they sent me Blackstreet.
Oh, okay.
2 albums that I never bother listening to.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like what I was reading earlier about the lie of the curated experience by Spotify and Pandora. You're definitely going to get a lot of the same songs, which is frustrating because the article started off, the one that I had sent you, and it's called Statistically No One Is Listening. Spotify hit the 100,000 uploads a day mark.
Yeah.
Every day, 7 days a week, 100,000 songs are uploaded onto Spotify a day. And I know some of those songs have to be in the trip hop instrumental genre.
It's like 75,000 EDM songs.
They send me the same 20.
Yeah.
I get the same. No, I have discovered an artist here or there. Generally, it's stuff I just missed. One thing I do like about these streaming services is that I can go back for the whatever $9 that I pay and listen to stuff that I didn't really think was cool when I was younger, or had the ability, like you said, have the money to buy. Like I always wanted early Def Leppard stuff.
Oh yeah.
But it's like, when you got to make that choice, Leprosy, or High and Dry, Chuck's winning every time.
Yep. Yeah.
Every time.
That's literally like that is an experience that like I can relate to fully, because that's exactly how it was for me. Like, and I was a kid that I did take some pretty wild swings when I'd go to the record store. A lot of it had to do with just the fact that there were, discounted records, and so, like, it, like, for instance, when I got into Sepultura, I went to get, I guess it would have been a Rise at the time, and
Ooh.
that is fantastic, legendary record, but that record was it was like, $14, and the I'm spacing out on the name. It was like their very first one, which is like a split EP kind of thing, and where the Troops of Doom was on it, but it was a really early, really bad recording of it,
Mm.
and it was like their first like basement tape record, and I bought that, and Morbid Visions, that's what it was called, and like it sounded terrible, and the recording was awful, but I knew songs that none of my friends knew because I had their first demo,
It's like getting Haunting the Chapel, right?
yeah, yeah. And so it was kind of cool, but at the same time, like, it took me a while to get up to speed with a lot of bands because I was buying, the bargain basement stuff. But at the same time, once I was really into a band, anytime new stuff came out, that was like what I got, and that was to the detriment of discovering back catalogs. And
Yeah.
nothing I liked was on the radio. I mean, some of it was, but everything I really liked at that time was, way too subversive. And we did have the college station did have, it still does to this day. KUNM has a show called Tombstone Rock on Wednesday nights.
Oh, they play metal.
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. to like 2 a.m. or something, and it's like death metal, like super heavy stuff. So I discovered a lot of bands that way. I would literally just I'd get blank tapes and just record the whole thing every single week. And but other than that, yeah, my exposure was really limited because, people who were into that music, it was a small group of friends. Like, we'd exchange tapes and, tape them off of each other and stuff. But at the same time, we also, even back then, understood, like, if we like a band, we got to like support them. So we try to buy the records, at the very least buy tickets and go see the shows, but I don't know, I guess, I don't know, this is going to be the old guys waxing nostalgic episode.
Look, it is what it is, and I think there's some importance in thinking about, these eras of the past and where we are today, and how much things haven't really changed that much. I was talking with a friend I've made here. She's a little older than you and I. She's in her 50s, but she was a rocker chick back in the day in SoCal. She sadly is deported down here. And she was telling me about, she saw Kerrang magazine in the record store back in the 80s. She said this must have been like 87. And she said it was bigger than anything else, any other magazines. And in it, there was a pen pal section. And for those that don't know, Kerrang is a UK-based heavy music publication. So back in the day, the way people heard new bands was through pen pals. I believe that's how like Lars Ulrich met like Motorhead or something like that, through some pen pal fan club shit.
Well,
and so she didn't have the money to buy the magazine. She said it was an import, so it was expensive. So she just got a pen and paper and wrote down all the addresses in the pen pal section. And she wrote to some people. And she goes, they would send her music, and she was discovering all these cool heavy bands, all these cool heavy punk bands. She was her first time meeting like vegan, straight edge hardcore people before there was a term for vegan straight edge hardcore. This is that era. We're not quite the end of history era. And she actually ended up meeting, she says she's still to this day friends with one of the pen pals she made in this, from taking addresses off of the back of a magazine.
Wow.
To the point where she actually submitted her own ad for pen pals in the magazine, which I think is interesting, because I don't even see us in this era getting in a group to discover new music or meet people with like-minded interests.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, I don't know what that looks like these days. I mean, I got a neighbor kid who's like 20 years old, and he's a little metalhead, and he has like a little band and stuff. But yeah, he like, I mean, he loves talking about music and stuff. But I'm like, but how are you like discovering it? And he's like, oh, I just go on Spotify and like look for what's recommended, or go on YouTube. And it's like, man, like, but what do your friends like talk about? He's like, oh, we don't. My friend's like, yeah, man, you're in a band and you guys aren't talking about what you're listening to, man. Kids
I,
these
I,
days, I don't know.
I thought that's all what you do when you're at band practice is talk about whose album sucks,
Yeah, that's pretty much.
and then you rip them off.
Yeah, fucking Pantera riff sucks. Listen, I fixed it.
Yeah, we're just gonna play it backwards and 3-4 times, and that makes.
Yeah.
Jordan is joking. You can tell Jason never goes on Discord. I don't go on Discord because I don't believe people are looking for a like-minded community. I believe people are looking to call the people assholes.
Oh yeah.
So I don't. I get called an asshole enough through my email in the comments section.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't need to subject myself to any more name calling.
We coming for you, nigga.
That's how I feel whenever I go on Discord. Has anything changed? Oh, sorry. I had to turn.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Here. Has anything changed in the music industry as far as the power that the labels wield in you?
Yeah, a lot has changed. They've gotten more powerful. I mean, it's funny because they've gotten less economically powerful. Maybe that's not really the right word. They still have all the spending power, but the birth of the 360 deal is a perfect example of labels getting more power. Now, don't get me wrong, these existed in the 50s. I mean, this is something that's kind of always existed, but the way they've leveraged them since the digital age has far exceeded what how it impacted bands, because the way it was 60 years ago, 70 years ago was bad because the label just owned everything you did, but you also just kind of signed on to do that. It was like, yeah, you play these songs, you tour all over the place, and we pay you $75 a week or whatever it was, and it's like, okay, I mean, it's stupid, but okay, if that's the system, that's the system. But there's doesn't seem to be a lot of pretense. But nowadays it's like, yeah, we'll put your record on Spotify and we'll market it in online magazines, and we'll get you some features on Revolver or something, and we'll make sure that you get featured on like some Spotify playlists and this and that. And then all we ask of you is all the money back that we give you to do this, which is not much to begin with. It's like a few grand usually per album. And then on top of that, they're like, oh, and also we need like a massive cut of your merch, and we own rights to your branding, and we take cuts of your tours that if you're lucky, you're not already spending money to be on with buy-ons and stuff. So it's really I think they've become more insidious because they've had less ability to leverage music itself as a product, and so because they're not, nobody's pressing 3 million units to ship out to stores anymore. And so now it's like, well, we'll publish you, we'll have an intern at a warehouse publish you to Spotify, and then you owe us everything, and you're going to tour and come home with you're gonna feel like you have some money, and realize that you just spent 8 weeks on the road for $1,000, and you're and you're going to just repeat that cycle until you give up on it, and that's why I think the labels honestly gained power by this situation. The flip side of it is they have less power over artists to begin with, because you just don't have to play the game anymore. It's really like not even, in my opinion, unless you have something that truly is already going viral and you're making money off of like YouTube with your music video or something. And then a label comes in and says, well, we can amplify this X amount and you just give us X amount of what you make. Yeah, that would probably work because they know they're getting in business with someone who's already making money. But if you're, just any small band, like frankly, the last thing you should be doing is trying to get signed. You should be trying to figure out a way to get popular without getting signed. And you can literally just email Revolver Magazine. You can just be like, hey, what's it going to take for me to get like a banner on one of your articles or something, and they will take your money. Like, they don't care. And it's not like the ability to do that stuff is not exclusive to the labels anymore. So I don't know, like, I think that, yeah, they have less power in trying to leverage you to you don't have to feel like that's a goal anymore. Like, getting signed doesn't mean shit anymore. So just if you go into it with that mentality, they have zero power over you. But if you're those kids that just are like, yeah, it's going to be like Motley Crue when we get signed, it's like, dude, you're in for a horrible time, man. You're gonna reach your mid 30s before you realize how badly you've sunk, and then you're gonna have to start your life over.
Figure out how to be an adult.
Yeah, and then they're still gonna own your shit. So it's like, yeah.
Well, there is still something to be said about the ability to get into these places, because I still think there's some bit of gatekeeping in the sense of PR companies, I think, wield a certain amount of interesting power when it comes to getting you in certain publications. And to your point about getting you on a playlist or on the online version of a big publication in your genre, that still costs quite a bit of money. Hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per month that you pay a PR company. And some of these PR companies, it feels like there's a mill system where if you pay a certain amount, you're at a certain tier, then because the whole idea of being a no name with the PR company is that the PR company feels that you are a viable talent and you mesh well with what they do, and they have a bigger artist who they can leverage to get you publicity. If you want this exclusive from Justin Broderick, well, you got a deal. You have to listen to Jason and Cindy's album. You don't have to like it. You definitely aren't giving it a glowing review if you don't like it, but you have to listen to it, and you will write a review about it just so you can get this exclusive.
Right.
Which is, why people want to deal with PR, but it feels like there's even less of that. Like when I say mill, I mean, like, here, I paid you my $600 a month or whatever I can afford, and you're going to get me the Revolver website, which no one really goes to, is going to play my song for a month. And if I don't have the money to constantly pay you my $600, then that once that month is up, so is your care for me, and so is everyone's interests in me.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, it's well, in the PR industry it is in a weird place right now. Like, you could do a whole episode about that specifically and where that's gone. But where the right now, like, it's such a hot market that there are PR companies or PR companies that are geared towards just like, being like, hey, like, pay us $150 a month and like you get this many plays and this many, like, they're basically trying to game the system on your behalf. And then they will like get you on playlists and get you in, certain little features and stuff. But they just like do this shotgun approach. Like, my inbox on Instagram is like just those filtered out emails. It's just all those people all the time. Oh, we can get you this much engagement, and we can get you all these comments, and this,
love your music.
yeah. And it's like, dude, like, what do you even know who I am? Like, and I know you don't. It's just that I have one of those profiles that's a music page, and so they just shotgun at people like me. And me, I'm like, dude, it's not even. I'm not in the market. I haven't been in the market for a long time, and you know, but so there's like that whole tier, and then there's the tier of people that do have larger clients and do leverage that, and they'll work with you as an independent artist. I mean, almost all of them will, but the problem is that, yeah, you're going to be paying label prices for stuff, and
label prices are not. We were paying. So Pasquale knows me from my previous band with my ex, La Fin Absolue du Monde. And that this poster behind me is still one of my favorite shows.
oh
The
yeah,
Phobia show. That was
played
that
that
was fun.
one with you
That was
guys.
fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
But we were paying, I think, and it was like a hookup deal because we knew someone that knew someone that knew someone at this PR company that worked with Swans.
Okay.
And then Billy Gould from Faith No More knew him, and he gave us like, oh, these people are legit. But it was like $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
And we were legit struggling artists living in this fucking warehouse, touring way too much
Yeah.
for, two poor old people living in a van and shit.
Yep.
And it wasn't like Swans was putting anything out at the time. That's another
Right.
thing to think about when you're dealing with the PR company. And God bless the woman that dealt with us. She's a saint. She got us a lot of features. We got featured in stuff that still shocks me to this day.
Yeah.
Sadly, I lost a lot of that stuff. But oh, dude, yeah, PR is that we should do an episode one day on PR itself.
Oh yeah, God. That's that business. The industry's dirty, but boy, it gets real dirty over there.
Ooh, I don't think people really understand
No.
like exactly how dirty that shit is.
Yep.
Because like when you say paying label prices for PR, like oof.
Yeah. Yeah. Good PR is expensive. And the only reason labels, I mean, again, like, I'm talking about labels like Prosthetic Records and Century Media and stuff like these are really Century Media is pretty big by today's standards, but a lot of like Prosthetic's a great example. Like they're not really a big label per se. Very small crew of people running that. But the way they get their PR strength is by being willing to pay premium, top dollar for their biggest artists, and then using their biggest artists to leverage PR firms or whoever their marketing partners are to say, okay, well, like we're gonna, you guys will get these guys, they make you guys money, but you guys need to throw these 5 bands into the mix so that they can also be lifted by our heavy here. And like, so they are, if those little bands independently were trying to pay for it, yeah, it's like $1,500 a month or something. But, because they're lumping them in with their bigger guys, like they're getting it's a much better deal for the label. Cause again, they have the buying power. So they they'll pay $6,000 a month to cover like a huge swath of their roster, and that's the big difference. And arguably probably one of the only places that labels still have any real leverage, because again, and especially in the genres we exist in, it's never been big money. There has never like if there is a millionaire in death metal, it's not from death metal. Like it's
That person married rich.
or it's like Tosin or someone, a rich kid who,
Yeah, you talked about this on the last episode. If you guys haven't heard the last episode with Pasquale Romero, please go back and listen to it. I wish MT was here to post the older episode, but where we talked about that a lot of these people can stay alive as with a changing industry where you don't have the same revenue streams, or you're not even getting played on radio because they come from money.
Yeah.
most bands that you still hear, like, oh, this band's still not. Yeah, they come from money.
Yep. And you'll see it, man. I mean, you know, in Tosa, like, don't get me wrong, I like Tosa, the guy, very nice guy. Also, insanely talented musician.
Mhm.
But so he's put in that work, but he also is just well off to begin with. Like, he drives a very expensive sports car, and I'm positive it's not Animals as Leaders money. I'm positive it's not selling guitars money. And I know his brother's like a fashion designer in New York, and they're also a notorious group for being affluent kids to begin with. But and not to throw him under the bus. I mean, there's a bunch of them. The guys from Periphery, Misha, that kid's like, he drives like a Lamborghini. It's like Periphery does not sell Lamborghini records. Like, and they're popular, but again, it's a genre that's not that well off. The problem to me is that you go to their Instagram and they don't try to delineate like
No.
where that Lamborghini got paid for.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, like, I mean, maybe you're making some decent money now because you've got like DAWs that you're selling and stuff. But I mean, like, the core of what you're doing is you're not making millions of dollars selling death metal, or not, prog metal records. And it's, I don't know, I guess it is a little offensive, just, but again, it's also like, it's image. They're selling their image that way. That's how they want to be. They want people to think that that's how they're living as a result of their music. And I mean, I get where the temptation comes from. Again, we were all a bunch of kids raised on Motley Crue and shit, and that was
Motley
like,
Crue and Reaganism, right? We can't forget
yeah,
those two things.
yeah.
Like those, like
There'd be no Motley Crue without Reagan, man.
no Motley Crue without Reagan.
Yep,
And
yep.
that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. We are over an hour right now, so this is free champagne for everyone. We still are going to go to the champagne room. At least I am. I can't speak for Pasquale. I'm definitely going to do the champagne room, but
Yeah, I'll hop
I want
on
to give
over.
you guys some free champagne for a little bit with this question. You mentioned this, and I think this is very important, and I'm mad we kept skipping over this. That era, that singer-songwriter, burgeoning hippie movement era, this very self-important era, an era I've written about. The last thing I wrote about was about this moment, where this is the age of important music, and the Bob Dylans of the world, and the Carole Kings of the world. That Carole King starts off in a mill.
Yep.
She starts off in a songwriting mill.
Yep.
Who becomes, legendary singer-songwriter Carole King. So important with it. Like any white person with an acoustic guitar and a frilly shirt and maybe one of those leather jackets with the fringes.
Yep.
You're doing something important. And if you sound like this, and then you're really important.
Yep.
I feel like that's also this moment where marketing for the whole, Adam Curtis talks about it in Century of the Self, goes away, and now we can market towards the individual.
Yeah.
And these guys were all about being individuals, playing the same three chords.
Yeah. They were extremely individual in being individually monolithic. So.
Like no one busted out an accordion with all that. It was like, wait, why don't we turn up the BPMs in this? We could do the same thing with no. We're all going to look exactly the same.
Yep.
As we reject your normativity.
Right. Yeah. I know. Like any picture of Woodstock, it's like they literally cut and paste the same 5 people, and like I swear it's like a simulation of a crowd. Like I'm like, is that all the same guy? It's weird.
And what's interesting to me is that if you talk about this era, you mentioned it earlier. We've been talking about this, how this era of music was really segregated to the people that could afford it. Kind of the same way we talk about news stations and why they market towards older people because they can afford the advertising.
Yeah.
So we want people that can afford the concert ticket and the album, and we're not selling merchandise at this level, but That's the consumer we're looking for.
Yep.
And this new important music still spoke to that consumer, in my opinion. Do you disagree?
No. I mean, I think that's pretty right on the money. I mean, I don't know.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it's just the middle class cat just changed his outfit. He
Yeah.
took off his Letterman jacket for the fringy jacket
Yeah.
because the fringy jacket said, "I'm not going to Vietnam."
Right.
That's what that said.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Like, I always think about, my my father, who was a big music fan in the 60s, and saw a lot of the greats live, and was part of the counterculture, but like he was over there on the Chicano Revolution side, and that side just did not have anything that spoke to it at that time, and Black Revolution didn't either, really. It was like those cultures, they were trying to like fold them into the look at Woodstock. Like, Woodstock's the perfect example. Like, you've got guys like Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana,
Mhm.
and like they're not speaking to the roots they came from. They're speaking to the crowd in front of them, which is mostly kids who are like, I'm not going to the war. It's like, you weren't going in the first place. Like, you weren't gonna go. Like, my dad, like his generation of Chicanos are gonna go. Like, Jimi Hendrix, all his generation of Black kids are all going, getting their asses shot off. Like, you guys are not the demographic. Like, they know how to pick around you guys. Like, and like, good for you for being against it. Like, I'm not gonna begrudge you that opinion, but like, but then that's been politics this whole fucking time. So I mean, that's its own thing. But it's just that I don't know, like that whole singer songwriter era to me was just, again, it's like the industry knew what it was doing, and the people who were eating it up were just morphing through. They're just morphing through the phases, and that's how it's always been. And it's I don't know, like, is there truly a counterculture in pop culture at all? Like, I don't know.
That's the one question I've been asking myself, and I've been trying to literally figure that out. In all seriousness, is there really a counterculture, or is there just a series of little cottage industries?
Right.
Finding out that rhythm and blues and all this other music, even down to country, had an audience, but not the right audience. And then once it got to the point where it had a right audience, then it just gets folded into the mainstream. Punk to
Right.
me is the same way.
Right.
Once those guys get the ability to play corporate venues and get sponsorship deals and everything else, major label deals, they all take them. So were they really so antithetical to the man, or was it just a good selling point for a bunch of angry young people that were seeing a declining piece of a pie?
Yeah.
They ended up wanting that pie. They didn't want to make a new one for the world. They just wanted, their slice. And that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
And why I'm so depressed all the time and make these sad video essays. But that being said, his name is Pascual Romero, and he is in a band called Devil's Throne with his wife. I think there's other people, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just played all the instruments themselves.
There's a rotating cast of other people. Not really, but sometimes.
Like, you guys really don't need any help.
Yeah.
And if you follow Pasquale on social media, sometimes you can see him play his guitar, which he is an amazing guitar player, an amazing bass player. I am extremely jealous. But I'm coming for you.
You better be, man.
I'm coming for you. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We will be going in. You're gonna hang out with me in the champagne room for a little bit?
Yeah. I'll hang
Talk
out for a
some
little
shit.
while. Sure.
Just shit on some hippies. We're gonna shit on hippies in the
You know,
champagne.
the shit on hippies room.
We'll shit on hippies, and we'll talk about something I want to talk to Pasquale about: sexism in the 90s.
Ooh.
Lorena Bobbitt, OJ. I watched the documentary. I was in tears watching this documentary. So I want to give you. I'm gonna ask you some questions. Thank you so much, Toussaint. Are you going to join us for our conversation about women in the 90s? If you join us, Toussaint, I'll talk about I'll leave little clips about my weekend getaway in Mexican wine country. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you soon in the champagne room. We are